Origin Code Academy. Our job is to get you one.
Welcome to Origin Talks. I am Jeff Winkler, CEO of Origin Code Academy, and today we're joined by Aaron Fulkerson, CEO of MindTouch. So thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having us. It's nice to have you in the office and nice to have Origin Code Academy in the building. It's one of the reasons, combined with the incubator, that MindTouch actually selected this building was this is really the hotbed for technology, specifically software, in downtown San Diego. So it's a great building to be in.
I know you have a little bit of an interesting background, so why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started?
Sure. I think this would probably resonate with your students because I didn't start college until I was 25. So I graduated high school barely with a 1.67 GPA, Northern California, and I hit the road and backpacked for a lot of years. And I ended up in northern Minnesota. That's where I met my wife. And then backpacked Europe, and I cooked. I was a line cook. I was a sous chef. I was an executive chef. Then I started college when I was 25-ish at a community college, Durham Technical Community College. And I knew I wanted to be in software, right? Because I saw through some nonprofits I helped set up a need for people to be able to connect online and see the world differently. In Durham at this time in North Carolina, it was a pretty tough neighborhood. And there was people who didn't ever leave a 10-mile radius. So they had no concept of what was going on in the world. So I saw that by getting them online, they could get a different perspective. So anyway, I started doing some nonprofit stuff that are actually still in operation, and went to school, and that was tough. It was really, really tough going to school when you're, 25, 26. I mean, I think maybe it was 26, and I graduated when I was 30, right?
Okay.
So that was a really, really tough experience because I went to community college before I went to Chapel Hill. I'm with a bunch of young kids that are really wickedly smart at Chapel Hill in particular. It's a very competitive program. And you really struggle with this whole like imposter syndrome, this I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I mean, by the way, I'm the first generation in my family's recorded history that went to college. Both my parents are high school dropouts. So yeah, it was a challenging time. But again, I go back to what I was saying before. You have to maintain this being self-critical while still being pathologically optimistic and confident in your ability, and just grind it out with grit. And I know that for a lot of your students that oftentimes are starting their second career, it's congratulations, right? I mean, congratulations to them. That's an exciting time. It doesn't feel like it right now. It's probably really scary, but stay focused, stay confident, and you're gonna have a great career.
So follow-up question to that, you have to create a pattern of teaching yourself, right? Like of constantly always learning. So is that something where you're just reading books all the time, podcasts, and what process do you have to continue to?
So absolutely, one of our core values here at MindTouch is arete, and it's a Greek word that means virtue. Just there's no direct translation. It basically means always invest in striving to achieve your fullest potential. And even back when I was hitchhiking, backpacking, the thing that I was really focused on was enriching myself. So I was always studying, always reading. Absolutely. I mean, there's so many opportunities to teach yourself now. It used to be hard. Now, I'm taking classes on neuroscience through great courses. I take classes on cognitive science through great courses. There's so much stuff out there to teach yourself. It's great. So I'm always, as we all should be, investing in striving to achieve our fullest potential. And it means that you don't get on Netflix and binge watch, right?
Right.
You don't get drunk at night, right? Instead, what you do is you invest in yourself and you invest in your future, and it's much more rewarding.
So I wanted to kind of jump right into the MindTouch story. You guys are, correct me if I'm wrong, 10 years old?
Yeah, well, we started off as an open source project. In 2006, we shipped the first version of the open source project. That's Steve and I who are the co-founders.
Okay.
And within a year, actually to our surprise, we were the fourth most popular open source project in the world. And that was ranked on SourceForge out of 300 and something thousand open
sure.
source projects. So this was before GitHub, so everybody put their projects on SourceForge, and it would rank based on distribution. So we were doing thousands of downloads every day of our open source project. And it was Steve and I who started this. He runs engineering, he's the CTO, and then I'm on the business side.
Okay.
I do these, I'm like, why, if it's Origin Code Academy, Steve, why aren't you doing the talk?
Yeah.
It's like, because I would require days of preparation just so that I wouldn't be completely nervous during the interview.
Yeah, I just talked to Steve, and he's like, I don't know what I would say. And then he told me something awesome, and I was like, all you would have had to say was that. So I totally get it. So at what point did you and Steve, you were like, let's turn this into a company?
Well, I mean, when we started the open source project, we were scratching an itch, and we were really passionate about our idea that originally it was researchers that will come up with great findings but have a difficult time actually transmitting that information out to a broader audience. And the way that they do it is through these long-form papers, research papers, right? And we wanted to come up with a better way for driving self-service for researchers. And Steve and I met doing research at Microsoft in distributed systems and high-performance computing. Distributed systems is what you would now call Internet of Things, right? So that's where it was born from, is the idea that we needed a better platform for people to author and publish content, to matriculate their research out to a broader audience through a self-service mechanism like the internet, right?
Right, okay. And so between you and Steve, how did you decide who was going to be, or did you not have to decide yet who was going to be in charge of, like, he's the CTO at this point?
I'm a terrible programmer.
Okay.
So
Well, that settles it.
we're totally polar opposites. He's, although we have the same common ground, we both have a very weird sense of humor and just a lot of love for each other.
That's all you need.
Yeah.
So in terms of what you guys, the value that MindTouch adds today, how is that different back then? Like, where did you start? Like, what was your first value proposition, essentially, and how did that evolve?
Great question. So the first version of MindTouch was an open source project that turned into a company that failed. So we grew that company to it was just over 4 million in annual recurring revenue in the span of like 2.5 years of selling commercial subscriptions and a commercial version of the product. And it was this broad use case around collaboration. And 08, 09, 2008 is when we first started selling a subscription model on the open source. And 2009, a lot happened, which was you had Box and Dropbox and Atlassian and all of these vendors that had much more mature businesses and literally $100-200 million in the bank funding. Come driving into the space that we were occupying. And we're like, well, we can't compete against these guys because we were a self-funded open source project that we were doing a few million in revenue.
Right.
So in 2009, Steve and I looked at the business and we're like, well, there's no way we can defend this space, this big, huge space. We've got Microsoft SharePoint coming in it and all these other people. Because while we'd originally started off focusing on researchers and documentation for research, what our open source project pulled us into was IT guys installing us for an internal collaboration system, right? Like think Dropbox or Box or SharePoint or Atlassian Confluence, right? And 2009, we're like, well, we're screwed. We can't defend that. And we said, well, do we have a business here with this technology? We had much bigger distribution than any of those players because there was millions of people installing and using our open source product, but no way to monetize and turn it into a defensible business model. So we looked at our customers, which, we were doing a few million well, we were doing whatever it was. We had, 1,000 customers, but very small, transactional. So we looked at our customers and we said, okay, well, we've got PayPal, Intuit, ExactTarget, Mozilla, who makes Firefox, and a handful of these companies using us for, lo and behold, self-service for their products instead of research. And we said, well, nobody's really innovated or done anything around documentation, which is why we started this to begin with. Let's just go 100% on this. And Steve's like, well, we have to go cloud. The distribution economics of a SaaS or software as a service distribution model for software is far more disruptive than open source. And then we can ship the product much more quickly. And we were doing product releases every 4 to 6 months. Now we just every week on Thursday.
Okay.
So he was adamant about moving to the cloud. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. Let's do that. And we changed directions, restarted the company, took all of our legacy customers that were our on-premise, open source, commercial paying customers, took those revenues to fund the new cloud business, which focuses on this whole use case of it's a really interesting use case because nobody's thought of it before us, is every business, whether you're the software unicorns in Silicon Valley, Domo, Docker, Zenefit, Zora, Avalara, Sprinkler, they're all MindTouch customers. And complete opposite end of the spectrum, KitchenAid, Amana, Maytag, Electrolux, Whirlpool, Fisher Paykel, Accenture, Charles Schwab, they're all MindTouch customers. So what they use MindTouch for is to drive revenue growth with their user manuals. So the user manual hasn't been innovated since before there was an internet.
Right.
The thing is that all businesses have to create a user manual. It's referenced in the warranty when they sell their product. So what MindTouch does is we take that user manual, it's more broadly help content, customer support content, training materials, and the user manual. We convert that into a digital experience that helps them sell more products. So it helps their buyers and customers understand their products better, and then the companies understand their customers better so they can sell them more stuff.
So I wanted to go back and kind of address the first time that you guys had mentioned maybe you failed. So can you kind of talk about how you handled that, maybe some of your key learnings, or if you pivoted to another, industry?
Yeah. So just to be really clear, since you mentioned the term du jour about a pivot, it was a total failure, right? That first company, we failed, and the reason why was because we tried to go after too broad of a market. It was not a defensible space. And what I mean by that, and I see this so often with entrepreneurs that are starting out, is they're not trying to solve for a defensible market or a defensible problem. They're trying to, I spoke with this company just the other day, and they're like, we're gonna become a social aggregator of all of everybody's social streams, and everybody's gonna use us, and it's gonna be great. And it's like, my question to them was, do you have $1 billion? Well, no, you will not succeed, right? You can go after a very focused niche problem or market opportunity, nail that, and then go to an adjacent one, and an adjacent one, and an adjacent one, right? It is most commonly the case that entrepreneurs try to focus on hey, in 10 steps, here's what my product's going to do. You need to focus on what is the first step, what is the exact market opportunity or problem that you're going to address, and you better make damn sure that it's a problem that you can be best in the world at. And that's what why we failed was we tried to take way too much down, right?
When you and Steve were sitting there, were you like, okay, should we just go get jobs now, or should we actually, go this alternate route? Like, what was because I have to assume there was some self-doubt in that process, that it was like, should we try this again, or like, what did that process look like?
Yeah, I tried to fire myself. Yeah, absolutely, self-doubt.
How'd that go?
Steve was like, well, maybe once we get things on track, we come up with a new role for you. But for right now, you gotta continue to lead, Aaron. Yeah, self-doubt is something that, that's the nature of being an entrepreneur, right? You always struggle with that. The trick is that you have to be insanely optimistic.
Okay, awesome. And I'll kind of shift a little bit to a little bit about your guys' hiring practices and stuff. Like, what are some little things that you guys do in hiring practices to ensure that you guys have quality developers and employees overall? I
look for people who are interesting, because you're going to spend a lot of time with people. You spend more time with your work family than you do your family. So I always look for people who are interesting, and I look for people who have grit. And what I mean by grit is people who've been through some shit, who've had life experiences that were challenging, that made them struggle, and they persevered and they made it through. That is the most important ingredient to success, is people who can actually just suck it up and grind it out and succeed nonetheless, in spite of really shitty situations. I'll ask people, like, tell me something interesting about yourself. One of my most common interviews, I ask everybody that question. And then I'll also ask a question like, well, what's the hardest thing you've ever done? And that's identifying those two key characteristics.
Across the board, when you ask people what's most interesting about themselves, do you get a lot of boring answers?
Yeah, bullshit answers.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I worked on this project. I'm like, no, I don't. That's not interesting at all.
Yeah.
That's the most interesting thing about you, really?
Yeah.
Like, you're not very interesting. I have told people that. Like, well, So they're like, well, what do you mean like personal or professional? I mean the most interesting thing. Like,
Yeah,
tell me something interesting
sure.
about you. So yeah, most commonly you'll get kind of a BS like non-answer, you know, and then I tend to ask that question later in the conversation. So by then they already know the tone in which I'm conducting the interview. And to use the word interview is more formal than what it actually is. I'm just
Right.
having a conversation with a person.
So let's say you had just graduated Origin Code Academy yesterday. How would you go about looking for a job in San Diego, or advice that you would give to somebody graduating?
I tell people this all the time is, first of all, don't go take a job for somebody, right? Don't go work for somebody. Do your own thing. Try to start your own business. And if that's just absolutely not a reality, then find a job that you're working with somebody. There's a big difference between working for somebody and working with somebody. So always find somebody that you're going to work with. You know, that may be that you're subordinate to them, but it's all about the mindset. So that's something that I always say. Another thing is, if they're graduating Origin Code Academy, like start a portfolio, start building products, start building projects, open source projects, whatever. You know, you need to get your GitHub profile up. You need to make sure that you've got work that people can look at. And that's honing your craft, right? You've got to sharpen your craft, develop your craft, and that means you've got to actually be building product, writing code. So whether you're jumping in on open source projects, which I know can be really intimidating because there's a lot of difficult people sometimes inside open source communities, doesn't matter. Just be fearless and start shaping your craft by actually rolling up your sleeves and getting work done.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for joining us for Origin Talks. I get to do the outro. So it's been an honor to be included on this. I really appreciate it. And I hope you guys got some value out of it. Feel free to email me, Aaron@mindtouch.com, if you're interested in asking additional. No, actually, Steve@mindtouch.com. He loves emails. And he manages the hiring here too. So there you go.
Awesome. Thanks again, Aaron.
Pleasure. Thank you.